welcome to the Earth Feels podcast.
I'm Rose.
And I'm Christine.
Welcome to Earth Feels, the podcast for people feeling overwhelmed by the endlessly gloomy climate news.
Where every week we have soul-based conversations about climate change and explore the idea that climate change may be happening for us as much as it is happening to us.
If you are ready to shift your focus and secure the future for our kids and our grandkids, then this is the podcast for you.
And yes, we do know how to spell. Hi, Rose.
Hello, Christine.
Today's question is, how do we prepare for chaotic times?
Armageddon? How do we prepare for Armageddon?
For climate Armageddon. And the reason that this came up for me recently is because, well, partly because I've been doing a lot of canning, so food prep, and not always initiated by me. My daughter lives in the same community, and she's a huge gardener. She loves gardening, and she also is really getting into canning. And so we came back from our canoe trip, our last one, a couple of weeks ago, and our listeners may or may not remember that was right after we'd been evacuated community-wide for a week before our canoe trip. So all that to say, we had ordered 50 pounds of cucumbers for the week of the evacuation from the local farmer who comes up. We don't have a lot of farming in this rocky boreal forest that we live in, but there's a farmer that comes up every Tuesday. And so she'd ordered it the Tuesday after.
50 pounds of cucumbers?
So her partner loves pickles. And so we did it for him. Kevin. This was for Kevin. So yeah, we probably go through, I don't know, maybe 4 jars of pickles a year. And in their household, they'll probably go through that in a month. So anyways, yes, we thought that seemed reasonable, but it got delayed because of the evacuation. So all that to say, she got them a week late, and then we were gone for a couple of days. So the two of them, showed up with these 50 pounds of pickles or cubes to turn into pickles before we'd even unpacked from canoe camping. So yeah. Anyway, so that's what we've done. That we've picked a lot of local apples. We don't have a lot of regular apples around here, but we've got a lot of crab apples. So one of our family favorites is hot apple jelly to put on cream cheese or brie or something like that. We like to have an adequate supply for ourselves and also to give for gifts. Done a lot of that. Done a lot of, apples. Oh, corn. We also ordered 12 dozen corn in the cob that we pressure canned. So anyways, so it goes on and on. And I just before we sat down to record, hauled out 7 jars of zucchini relish, which I've never made before, but we have so many zucchini. I had to do something else with it. We had a lovely zucchini parmesan dish last night, and so all this, and I'm thinking about how my preparation for my journey as a climate activist took me into the transition movement, which we've talked about. Do you remember the idea?
Refresh my memory.
Okay, because the idea with
refresh our listeners' memories.
Okay. Rob Hopkins is one of the leaders of this, and there's other sort of permutations out there, but I particularly resonated with the transition movement back in 2011, 2012, and he basically said, it's obvious that governments aren't working quick enough to deal with climate change, but maybe as individuals and communities, if we get together, put our heads together, we can do this together. And so what that did was inform my work, but also there's a group of us in our community. We got community gardens going. We started 3 community gardens, I think in 2011, 2012. One is thriving still. The other 2, one is completely unused, and the other one is sort of limping along. There's, I think, about half of the beds were looked after this year. But anyways, all that to say, it's sort of like, let's get people gardening. We have a Facebook page that's been active for 8 years. It's called Red Lake Let's Eat Local. And there's hundreds of people on there, and there's always conversations going on about, I noticed this bug on my tomato plant, and somebody just posted this week. Sadly, our listeners will go, why do you live in Northern Ontario? Because somebody posted it's supposed to go down to freezing this week, which it did last night.
Oh my God.
I know.
No.
Should I haul in all of my tomatoes? That sort of thing. So that wasn't at all about COVID when we started doing this, but this is a very long-winded way of saying, when you're prepared, you're more resilient.
Mm-hmm.
Climate change is challenging all of us to be more resilient, to be less dependent on the global food supply, and but also it can, if we let it, allow us to be more dependent on each other in community, locally. So whether it's farmers markets, whether it's your neighbors, because you've talked about the way you barter fish for tomatoes. I don't know how that's been going this summer.
Yeah, it's been great. We actually had a wonderful fish the other night, and I gave them tomatoes and squash because I've got summer squash out the wazoo.
You might be making zucchini relish too soon.
It's not zucchini, it's butternut. Can I make butternut?
Oh,
It's butternut. I've got to find other things to do with it, and that's I've done sun-dried tomatoes. So there is something very wonderful about being more independent, more self-sustainable, and more in alignment with the land, more in concert with Mother Nature.
Yes, because when you're a gardener, you do notice, you watch the weather like we did here. If I could show you a picture, our tomato plants look like ghosts. They're all covered up with sheets because.
Oh, really? Okay.
Well,
because you're expecting it to be cold at night.
It went down to, so we use Celsius here up in the Great White North, but it went down to 1 degree, which is 34 degrees Fahrenheit. Unusually,
no, I'm still sleeping with my windows open and a ceiling fan on.
Wow. Yes, unusually chilly even for where I live. But those are the kind of extremes that will become more apparent as we move into this climate crisis. I mean, I heard that Santa Fe, New Mexico was expecting snow a couple of days ago. I don't know if that's typical for it either.
Denver had a swing from 100 degrees one day to 2 days later, 4 to 8 inches of snow.
Wow.
I lived in Boulder for 3 years, and we did sometimes get a freak snowstorm around Thanksgiving or whatever, but September in Denver, I mean, up in the mountains maybe, but yeah, crazy. Yeah. So the fluctuations are there.
Yeah, and that's just a fact. We've put enough pollution into our atmosphere that's a fact. That's a reality. So I guess I don't want to say this to be scaring people, because it's past gardening season, and if you haven't gardened yet, obviously it's time to start prepping for next year's, but not to do anything about this year's. But to get us thinking about it or talking about it, because in our last week's podcast we talked about safety and how fear keeps us from acting the way we need to on climate change collectively.
Yeah, that's interesting, because one of the ways to get out of fear is to take action. So they're very enmeshed.
Yes. And looking after your food system, bringing it closer to home, is taking positive action. And it also, I don't know if you remember, we talked about the root chakra in our last week's podcast about safety and security. that's very much about food is part of that root chakra. And so it satisfies so many very real physical needs, but also emotional and energetic, if you will. And it can bring people together. It's not a political thing.
So what's coming up for me right now really strongly is COVID is giving us an opportunity to practice.
Yeah.
For what's ahead.
Yeah.
To get the learning, to experiment, to see what works and what doesn't work for you individually, for us individually, and then taking that learning and collaborating with one another, because we all have different gifts and different talents. You have cucumbers, crazy cucumbers. I have crazy squash. We live too far apart to collaborate, but I think that's part of it.
Yeah, I think you've really identified a really important point that, and you've said it before on this podcast as well, that COVID is a gift. And that's one of the gifts, is that it's a wake-up call for like, wow, that whole global supply chain, not as secure as we thought. Oh, and what will be happening with climate change more is even the local, more local in that US-based or Canadian-based supply chain, not as dependable. Like what has happened? You talked about, is it DeRoche's?
It's Derecho. I pronounced it wrong. It's Derecho. And what it is basically a straight line windstorm that's related to the heat from thunderstorms. And so it's similar to a hurricane, except for it doesn't have the whirling of the tornado and that kind of thing. But I had never heard the terminology until Iowa cornfields were essentially flattened a couple weeks ago. And I was like, so this is a new weather term, new to me, not new to weather persons, meteorologists.
But the reason you know about it is because it's becoming more common.
Right. Yeah, because it flattened, I don't know how many acres of corn in Iowa. And for those of us, who are involved in climate know that they're recovering from flooding. They weren't even able to plant until really late, if at all. And then what was planted was just knocked down. So yeah, the food supply chain is definitely affected and will continue to be so by climate. How do how do we adapt? How do we become more resilient? And with every challenge is an opportunity, right? If you can put a positive spin on it.
But it's true, because we're also been incredibly wasteful consumers.
40% of our food supplies goes to the dump.
So
goes to landfills. So how do we, there's so many food deserts. I mean, how do we supply people that aren't getting food? Maybe it's, neighborhood gardens, maybe it's urban gardens, it's rooftop gardens.
Exactly. And it's that creativity, like Seattle planted, I think they have 5 or 7 acres in somewhere in their city. That's an urban food forest. So they planted.
Nice.
Yeah.
Yeah, I wasn't aware of that.
Well, it was probably since you've moved, because it's in the last 8 years, maybe 10 years.
Mm-hmm.
But, and thinking about that community-wide response in Victoria, British Columbia, on Vancouver Island, in spring already, because we divide our time up between Northern Ontario and Vancouver Island. In
you
spring,
and Mark.
That's right. In spring, when we were there, before we left in May, they were already saying, okay, the city had planted extra vegetable plants, used their staff to give away to residents who wanted to plant a garden this year.
Nice.
In response
really nice.
to COVID, because realizing that the food security may become an issue. So that's proactive. It's a community-wide response. It's awesome. Especially, interestingly, because by May in Victoria, you couldn't buy a package of kale seeds anywhere. Everybody.
Well, that was here too. I think because of COVID, everybody was home and planting and gardening and, you needed to have projects to do. I'm saving a lot of my seed from this year, which I've never done before. I mean, there's just so much learning when you start gardening, and I'm already laying out the garden for next year and expanding it, and what worked and what didn't work and all that kind of stuff. So yeah, so preparing, learning how to eat differently too, right? So I might not have avocados, and
which would be sad.
Yes, because I love avocado toast.
Exactly.
But yeah, eating in season, which we are not want to do. We're so used to, papayas year round and pineapples year round, and
and it's not just the food system, lest people think we're just obsessed with eating,
which we are.
And gardening. But last episode, we touched briefly on what happens with the blackouts in California if you have an electric car that you want to charge. And that is a reality.
But then at the same time, I was having this discussion in the interim. If the electricity goes down, the gas pumps aren't working either.
Good point.
So, because I was like, so I'm going to be SOL with it when I have an electric car. And I'm like, and I look, I'm doing my research, doing my due diligence to figure out what you need and what you, so if you have your own solar battery in your garage for a Tesla, that's one of the things that Tesla talks about or makes available for money. For a price. Yeah. How long does that battery last? And what does that fuel and all those kinds of things? I mean, I think those are all questions we need to be looking at.
Well,
because I have panels on my house, but I sell it back to the grid, so that doesn't help me. I mean, I did it because I wanted to be part of the solution, so I wasn't even worried about what the cost aspect of it was. For me, I was just like, I don't want to be burning more fossil fuels. But now I'm kind of like, well. How do I look at changing that?
Right. And that's something I have no idea how it works, because we also have solar panels on our roof that feed into the grid. But could they be diverted, like in a pinch, to power a battery? That's the kind of thing. Or do you just have a couple of panels just to charge that Tesla? Are you talking about the Tesla Powerwall?
Yeah, the Powerwall.
Isn't that charged by? I thought it was a solar power battery.
It might be. I'm not sure. Not sure.
I'm pretty sure it is, because they were very involved in the response to Puerto Rico after the hurricane, and also Australia. They were involved in. You remember that challenge? That Elon Musk took up that challenge to help whichever state in Australia, it might have been Victoria, I'm not sure, get off the grid when I believe, was it related to their wildfires? I'm not sure, but
I know so much news. It's hard to not only comprehend it all, but retain any of it, because the next day you get a whole nother brain full.
Exactly. But that is the way that those of us who can afford it, because frankly, not everybody can afford an electric car and solar panels.
Right.
But that's why the good news last week was about, was it Tampa Bay and the state of Delaware going towards electric buses. So
electric buses, yep.
If you're a transit rider, that's good news as well. So there's, wherever you are, like in your life's journey, starting out middle of your career or retired, like Rose and I are, there's things that we can do. They might be slightly different and nuanced. I mean, I have to say, I have two nephews who are in their early 20s. And the one of them who's the older, he's 24, I believe. He's not somebody I think of as getting his hands down in the dirt a lot. He plays in a rock band. He studies philosophy at university. He's a lovely young man, but he's never been one to really be too earthy. Get dirty. But you know what I found out? He and his girlfriend put in a raised bed in their rented townhouse this year. And he encouraged his parents and helped his parents also build a raised bed. And he's gone vegetarian and he's given up alcohol. So when I hear that about my, nephews, to me that says, wow, the younger generation is tuning in a lot earlier than we did, because we started.
Well, they don't have 50 plus years of conditioning, to try to change. And quite frankly, we're kind of on the backside. They're the ones who are going to be, unfortunately, we've created a monster for them to have to deal with. And so whatever habits they acquire now will serve them well long after we're gone.
And I mean, the reason I mentioned vegetarianism is because that does have a lower carbon footprint in general than a diet heavy in meat. So I don't know if I have a lot more to say about it, this sort of adjusting, how to prepare. But there certainly are a lot of prepper websites out there. And I believe some of them, at least in the US, talk a lot about getting your guns.
No, we don't really.
Yeah.
Yes, they do. Yeah.
So the whole thing is,
it's more preparation versus survivalist. I think the survivalist is the gun, and yeah.
So that's not where we're going. And in fact, you want to build community, and stocking up on guns doesn't do that generally. So that's not what we're talking about. But think about ways that you can be more resilient. Even when you think about COVID in March, yes, stock up on toilet paper. That's important, but it's not the most important thing. Like what can you do on an individual level? Like you were talking about dehydrating cherry tomatoes. Those are my favorite. I do that all the time because they're so delicious all year, instead of those cardboard tomatoes you get at,
I know, in the winter,
in quotation marks, that you get.
Well, and I think, to extrapolate it, and we have talked a lot about food and solar and EV and but community in general, establishing some kind of community and a shared society. I mean, I think that's where we're going. Charles Eisenstein, who's, I've talked about him a lot. Moving into a shared society. Can you barter? What can you give? What do you have in your house that you never use? I mean, I'd like to see us go to a point where like there's 3 lawnmowers in a neighborhood instead of everybody having a lawnmower. Do you need all those tools that just sit there? I mean, it's consumption. And then when they break down, where do they go? They go into the landfill, because we don't fix things anymore because it's cheaper to buy something new. So it's it's rethinking, reimagining, revisualizing. Visualize the world that you want, and then move towards that and take steps towards that. This is a time to be really creative, to tap into that imagination.
Yeah. What have we got to lose?
We've got a lot to gain, that's for sure.
Yes, exactly. So do we have good news?
We do have good news, and it's related to food, of course. The world's biggest rooftop greenhouse in your neck of the woods, in Montreal, is as big as 3 football fields, and it can feed 2% of Montreal's population, even in the winter.
Wow.
That was just published today.
Wow.
So I'll put that link up there. Yep.
That is great news.
The link and it will have Trudeau's pictures in it. So.
Because of course he's involved in everything that we do up here, even rooftop greenhouses. I love that. And you know what? Maybe we'll put on the website as well. There's a fun video that my mother-in-law sent to us recently, which is a fellow, I think in Nebraska, who's built a greenhouse into the ground. So it's the base of it is in the ground. The part of it is above ground, where he grows, I kid you not, citrus fruits.
Wow.
Yeah. And it's all with ground heat. What is that?
Geothermal.
Heat pump based geothermal
Yeah.
but very minimalist, like he's not heating it like he does the house. It's fascinating. So, and
Oh,
fun.
I'd love
So
to see that.
let's put that up. And then our action tip is, I guess, kind of what we've been talking about. Rose suggested we look around our houses and see what we have that we don't use that we might be able to barter. And I would say too, what can you prepare in the kitchen now that you can keep over the winter, whether you have grown it or whether you buy it at a farmer's market. I'll post the zucchini relish recipe that I just put up, because I will confess we're not big relish eaters. And my husband might have been a little bit skeptical as to why I was making this recipe. But I just felt like we have so many zucchini right now, and I need to do something with them. And this is something that, hello, any family members who might be listening, you might be getting for Christmas too. But in the end, it smelled delicious, and I tasted it, but it actually was quite good. So almost everybody has extra zucchinis these days. So
I have never canned. I'm doing pickles for the first time this year, but I'm doing refrigerated pickles.
Okay.
I've never canned before. So
true confessions. We'll have to have a true confessions part of this.
No, not a good idea. Yeah, it just seems like a lot with boiling, and it just seems like there's so many things that could go wrong. So I'm a chicken to try it, I guess.
Well, interestingly, pickles was the first thing I canned like years ago, because they're pretty foolproof because you've got so much vinegar in them that they're not going to spoil easily. I don't know what to say about canning. It's just that I've learned, and actually I do way more since I got involved, since we had this community transition group, because we would get together and can.
Oh, that's good. Yeah.
Yeah. And
so I think so next time you're in the States after COVID,
yeah,
we'll have to do a canning session. Or if I come up there, we have to do a canning session.
Yeah.
I'm good with hands-on learning, as you know. I'm not good with like doing it on my own. I can do it on my own, but I'd much rather observe somebody else and go, oh, okay.
Yes. Well, and there might even be, depending when we connect, there might be some groups in your community that are doing that. So I'm going to look up and see if there's any transition groups in your area. And not that, again, people are doing a lot together in groups, but to know they might even be doing online sessions. Of course, then it doesn't matter if it isn't local, if it's online. But anyways, that is interesting. And I didn't know that you had never canned. And I'm sure a whole bunch of our listeners who are in that group. So I'm going to have to think about that, and maybe we can put up some links on our website. It's much less daunting than it seems. And part of what I learned in the transition work was how to use a pressure canner, which I confess, the first time my girlfriend and I pressure can, I don't know what it was, beans or something. Because, a pressure canner kind of has this reputation, and if it explodes, you're going to,
stuff goes everywhere.
So we hid under the table while it got to. I'm not sure what we thought that would do, but anyways, these days I'm quite comfortable with it. So we'll have more conversations about canning as we move along, but I will share that recipe. And
do we have a sanity tip?
You've said it before, digging in the dirt is so good for one's sanity. Again, September, not always the best time, but it's also the time when you're harvesting, if you have a garden, and you're prepping for next year. And you said you're already thinking and planning about what you're going to do differently next year. And I have to say, my family members, my husband and daughter, are planning our garden in Red Lake next year, because this year we didn't plant a lot of it. We gave it, because we have quite a large garden, but we were in Victoria, we allowed a local family that runs a CSA to use the majority of our garden.
Nice.
Yeah, it was great because it didn't go to waste. But now they're already planning how we're going to use it all next year because this family has happily got a 40-acre plot that they're going to be gardening. And for us here in the north, that's important because we haven't had a local market gardener here ever. And so we are so happy that they're doing what they're doing. That's why we were very happy to support them in any way we could. But I think we're going to be reclaiming it because they've got other garden space that they're going to be busy with. And so, yeah, maybe that's our action tip is clean up your own garden, do your harvesting, use it as a way to stay grounded in these chaotic times. And if it's fun for you, start planning for next year.
Exactly.
All right.
Okay.
Thanks for listening.
Great talking with you. See you
Bye-bye.
next time. That's this week's episode of Earth Feels. Special thanks to singer-songwriter Kristen Hoffman for generously allowing us to use song for the ocean. Thanks for listening.
Don't forget, subscribe to our podcast so you don't miss an episode. Catch you next time.
Bye-bye.
Children of the earth, I'm calling out. There's a mission for you and for me.